February 24, 1981. The Pentagon. President Ronald Reagan stands before a crowd of reporters and says something that sounds impossible. "If this were a movie script," he begins, his voice heavy with emotion, "you wouldn't believe it." He wasn't exaggerating. What you're about to hear is the story of a man who was told he would never walk again, who crawled through the darkness every single night, just to prove the world wrong. A man who jumped into a firefight against 1,000 enemy soldiers, armed with nothing but a knife. A man who was shot 37 times, stabbed with a bayonet, and placed in a body bag with the dead. And yet, somehow, impossibly, he lived. This is the story of Roy Benavidez, the man who refused to die. Hit that subscribe button, because heroes like this deserve to be remembered. Imagine being 7 years old and losing both of your parents. Roy Benavidez didn't have to imagine it, he lived it. Born in 1935 near Cuero, Texas, Roy was the son of a Mexican sharecropper and a Yaqui Indian mother. His father died of tuberculosis when Roy was just 2. His mother passed away when he was 7, orphaned, alone. A Mexican-American kid in 1940s Texas, where the color of your skin decided your future. Roy and his brother Roger were taken in by their aunt and uncle. They worked the fields, picked cotton under the blazing sun, dropped out of school in 7th grade because survival came before education. But Roy had a fire inside him, a refusal to accept the hand life had dealt him. At 15, he lied about his age and joined the Texas Army National Guard. At 19, he enlisted in the regular army. He wanted something more. He wanted to prove that a poor Mexican kid from the cotton fields could become something great. And then, in 1965, everything changed. May 2nd, 1965, South Vietnam. Sergeant Roy Benavidez stepped on a landmine. The explosion tore through his body. Shrapnel ripped into his spine. His legs shattered. Doctors airlifted him out, worked frantically to save his life. But the prognosis was devastating. "You'll never walk again," they told him. "Your military career is over."
I woke up at Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines. I was declared never to walk again.
Roy stared at the ceiling of that hospital room, paralyzed from the waist down, and he made a decision. He would not accept this. Every single night, when the nurses left, when the lights went dark, Roy would roll himself out of bed. He would drag his useless legs across the cold hospital floor, inch by inch, pulling himself forward with his arms. It was agony. His body screamed at him to stop. But Roy Benavidez had never stopped fighting in his life. Weeks turned into months. His legs, slowly, impossibly, began to respond. The doctors called it a miracle. Roy called it stubbornness. 1 year later, against all medical predictions, Roy Benavidez walked out of that hospital. And he didn't just walk, he became a Green Beret. Little did anyone know, the hardest test of his life was still to come. May 2nd, 1968. Exactly 3 years after the landmine, west of Loc Ninh, South Vietnam, a 12-man Special Forces team was surrounded, pinned down by over 1,000 North Vietnamese army soldiers, outnumbered, outgunned, dying. Their radio crackled with desperate calls for help, and Roy Benavidez heard every word. He wasn't supposed to be on that mission. He was at the forward operating base, safe. But when he heard his brothers were dying, Roy made a choice. He grabbed his medical bag and a knife. That's it. No rifle, no grenades, just a knife. And an unshakable will to save his men. The helicopter lifted off, flew straight into the combat zone. Enemy fire tore through the air, bullets ripped into the chopper, and when they couldn't land, when the situation looked hopeless, Roy jumped. He leapt from a hovering helicopter into a maelstrom of gunfire. The moment his feet hit the ground, a bullet tore into his leg, then another and another, but Roy kept moving. He reached the first wounded soldier, dragged him toward the helicopter, shielded him with his own body. Bullets ripped through Roy's arms, his back, his face. He didn't stop. For 6 hours, Roy Benavidez fought. He pulled 8 men to safety. He retrieved classified documents from dead bodies. He called in airstrikes. He threw smoke grenades. He bandaged wounds with his bare hands while his own blood poured onto the jungle floor. An enemy soldier charged him with a bayonet, stabbed him clean through the abdomen. Roy pulled the blade out of his own body and killed his attacker with it. He was shot 37 times. His intestines were hanging out of his body. A bullet had destroyed his jaw. Shrapnel had pierced his lungs. His right lung was collapsed. His arms were barely functional. And still, Roy Benavidez fought. Finally, after 6 impossible hours, the last helicopter arrived. Roy loaded the remaining survivors, shielded them with his body one final time, and then, as the helicopter lifted into the sky, Roy collapsed. The medics rushed to him, checked for a pulse, nothing. They placed him in a body bag with the other dead soldiers. Roy Benavidez was gone, or so they thought. A doctor was zipping up the body bag. Roy Benavidez couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even breathe properly. His body was shutting down. But somewhere deep inside, a spark remained. And in that moment, Roy did the only thing he could do. He gathered every ounce of strength he had left, and he spit right into the doctor's face. The doctor stumbled backward, eyes wide with shock. "He's alive! He's alive!" Roy Benavidez had cheated death. Again, the surgeries that followed were brutal. Doctors removed shrapnel from his body for weeks. He endured months of agonizing recovery. But Roy, being Roy, survived. And then came the hardest part. The Medal of Honor. His commanding officers submitted the paperwork immediately. But there was a problem. The Medal of Honor requires eyewitnesses. And in the chaos of that battle, everyone thought the witnesses were dead. For 13 years, Roy's heroism went unrecognized, until one day, a man named Brian O'Connor, sitting on a beach in Fiji, read a newspaper article about Roy Benavidez. Brian had been there. He had seen everything. He just never knew Roy had survived. Brian came forward, testified, provided the proof, and on February 24, 1981, President Ronald Reagan stood before the nation and placed the Medal of Honor around Roy Benavidez's neck. "If this were a movie script," Reagan said, tears in his eyes, "you wouldn't believe it. But it was real, all of it." Roy Benavidez passed away on November 29, 1998. But his story, his spirit, lives on. He spent the rest of his life speaking to students, telling young people, especially Latino and Native American kids, that they could be anything they wanted to be, that being poor, being told you'll never amount to anything, doesn't define you. That courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the refusal to quit, even when every fiber of your being is screaming at you to give up. Roy Benavidez was shot 37 times, stabbed, paralyzed, placed in a body bag, and he still kept fighting. So the next time you think something is impossible, the next time you think you can't go on, remember Roy. Remember the man who died twice and lived to tell about it. Remember the orphan from the cotton fields, who became one of the greatest heroes America has ever known. If this story moved you, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe, because stories like this deserve to be told. Roy Benavidez didn't just survive, he showed us all what it truly means to be. And remember, history is full of stories like this. Stories of survival, hope, and the incredible resilience of the human spirit. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, stay curious and never stop believing in miracles.